we've portrayed here a group of research subjects known as the rabbits. They called themselves the rabbits, the Krolniki. They were 74 Polish women who were involved in the resistance. When the British published on penicillin, the Germans felt, oh, they need to improve their own therapy for wounds. And one issue that arose was whether wound treatment should be purely surgical for infected wounds, or whether, if wounds were infected, should there be treatment with a type of drug called the sulphonamide, which had been discovered in Germany and which was available to the Germans from IG Farben, in fact, what was big pharmaceutical conglomerate. What the Germans did was to wound the legs of different sets of twins, but we see here that the twins have all got the same long, very deep leg wound. This photo here was done actually a secret clandestine photo, when one can see the very deep leg wound there. It was in order to demonstrate what had happened to the rabbits, because they feared for their life. And the film was kept by Germaine Tillion, a French prisoner, and there was a lot of solidarity to support the rabbits, who really feared for their lives. They feared that as experimental research subjects, not only were they in pain, not only were their legs appallingly looked after by this doctor here, Hertha Oberhäuser, one of the camp doctors, but they then were they then were very much in risk, and they were particularly at risk because they protested. They protested to the camp commandant against the injustice as prisoners of having experiments done to them. And so this articulate group of victims who protested, who evaded, who tried to avoid being killed because they were research subjects, they were really targeted. After the war, the wounds didn't heal, and so that they were one of the most vociferous groups, again, agitating for compensation. And so their cause was taken up by an American, Caroline Faraday, and there was solidarity between also an advocate for Jewish victims, Ben Ferencz, and they pressed for compensation and treatment. The perpetrators, Karl Gebhardt, who was the orthopedic surgeon who was a key person in instigating the experiments, his assistant, Fritz Fischer, who was a junior doctor working under Gebhardt and actually wounding the legs, and Hertha Oberhäuser, who was a camp doctor who was who was providing what was called post-operative care, but in fact was very negligent. They were all put on trial at Nuremberg. I think one point that one can make is that what happened at Ravensbruck was brought to the attention of war crimes investigators, and there was a particular British war crimes investigator, Keith Mant, and we have his diary here, which is his logbook he was made the effort to identify as many twins as possible. He was given the task by SOE, the Special Operations Executive, to identify what happened to SOE agents, and for the women agents, Ravensbruck was a place of execution. But in addition to doing that, Mant took upon himself to document as what was happening overall in terms of medical atrocities, and particularly medical experiments in Ravensbruck. The British, in fact, captured Gebhardt, Oberhäuser and Fischer in Schleswig at the end of the war. So these were British captives. Mant prepared the case with a number of other colleagues supporting war crimes investigations. One was a psychiatrist, John Thompson, and their evidence was then turned over to the Americans, because when the Americans organized the medical trial at Nuremberg, what happened was that Mant and John Thompson set out as far as possible to since the summer of 1945, they were documenting medical experiments in Germany, in the various concentration camps, and said what we need to do is to document the full spectrum of medical experiments as much as possible, because we cannot bring everyone to trial. Some of the perpetrators had committed suicide, some had been killed at the end of the war, and some had simply evaded, like Mengele had evaded arrest. So that so in addition to preparing cases against perpetrators and turning over the evidence to the US for their trial in Nuremberg, they had a very the large-scale evidence that they selected was very important, and so the twins come to Nuremberg to the medical trial and are very, very eloquent witnesses. So if we move over to the Nuremberg doctors' trial panel. We see that the medical trial at Nuremberg was the first trial which was run only by the Americans. On the other hand, in order to conduct the trial, and it was a short-term decision in the summer of 1946, the issue was should there be a second 4-power trial, and the problem was felt to be that if the 4-power trial was held in Berlin in the Soviet zone, it would become a sort of propaganda trial, so that instead the British encouraged the Americans, and the Americans also saw the point, to run their own series of trials continuing at Nuremberg. And so that we have, and the chief prosecutor was Telford Taylor, very, very eloquent in his introductory speech, where he prioritizes the victims of medical experiments, and he calls them the nameless victims in part. But this is there are two very special features about the trial. One is that many victims did testify. There was a cross-section of victims. This includes a group of these Polish rabbits who come to the trial, where the leg wounds are demonstrated by a physician, Leo Alexander. And the second issue that's very special about the trial is that at the end of the trial there is a declaration made by the judges on the correct conduct of medical experiments. And what the judges emphasized was that any participant in a medical experiment should do so voluntarily. They should be told of the risks, and they may opt out of the experiments at any time that they wish. So this provided the basis for what we would call now informed consent. And informed consent is really the basis not only of medical research, but also of all therapy, and is an incredibly important principle. So it's now 70 years since the judges in mid-August 1947 gave the 10 principles which they felt would be the basis for future research in order that it should be conducted on an ethical basis. And it was a really very far-sighted trial from that point of view.